Welcome to Sisters in Loss TV. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. And in part 2, we're talking about my second loss story, where I lost my daughter at 18 weeks due to cervical insufficiency or cervical incompetence. So if you want to hear more about my loss story, keep on watching. So this is part 2 of my series documenting via video of my journey to motherhood. In part 1, I talked about my loss with my first son, my stillbirth, Brandon Jr. So if you haven't watched that, please go back to part 1 and listen to my story there. And then I'll also make sure I link my podcast, which I go into a lot more detail, which is over 30 minutes long in audio form, but I wanted to make sure I captured it on video as well. But today we're going to talk about my loss with my second one and pick back up where we left off from the story with my son. So after my son was born, we laid him to rest. I went into maternity leave for about 3 months during the holidays. I ended up going back to work at the end of January of 2013. And after I got checked up from the doctor was extremely kind, and they were able to allow me into the practice through a back door, so I didn't have to go through the waiting room and see other pregnant women and babies. And it was so gracious. I was so thankful for them. And I knew at some point in time I was going to be ready to try again. And we did probably a few months later and tried again and conceived our daughter. Went through that pregnancy at the same OBGYN clinic and got up to about 12 weeks, where we did our anatomy, our ultrasound, to do all the gestational testing to really find out if this baby would have the same issues that my son had, and why he was born with lung deficiencies, and why he, did not breathe when he was born. So we did all that genetic testing, and as a part of that genetic testing, they were able to tell us the sex. So we knew when we went back into the hospital or back to our next doctor's appointment that we would know the sex of the baby. And actually, to be honest with you, they ended up calling me after we took that test at 12 weeks and told me that we were having a girl. So I knew very early on the sex of the baby that I was having for the second pregnancy. And I was excited. I was like, okay, this is a new opportunity. At that time, I was still working shift work at work, still working, very long hours, rotating shifts, sometimes working overnight for a few days in a row, and then back on days, switching back on days. And I knew that I didn't want to have that to sustain that entire pregnancy. So I started to have conversations with my supervisors about possibly getting off of shift work and moving to a daytime position that would make it more sustainable for my sleep patterns, especially during pregnancy. And I got all the way up until 18 weeks. I actually went to a training at work out of town and started to have some bleeding and spotting. And I went to the emergency room out of town, and they pretty much discharged me with just second trimester bleeding, and just kind of said that that's something that typically may occur. But at that time, I knew something else was wrong. So I ended up coming back home from that training on a Thursday. I remember it like yesterday. And that Friday morning, I was essentially in labor. I didn't know it at the time, but I was in labor. I ended up waking up, in a bunch of pain, very strong, like cramp-like pains. It was essentially me going into preterm labor. And when I arrived to the hospital, to the labor and delivery unit, they told me that the baby was still living, but they could see the bags of water coming out, and my cervix was already dilated. And at that point in time, at 18 weeks, there was nothing they could do, is what they told me. They told me that I was going to have to deliver the baby. And since the baby was only 18 weeks, they could not do anything to the baby. They couldn't try to revive the baby, even though the baby was of a certain weight, because the baby was still under 24 weeks, that the baby would just have to pass on. And I just couldn't comprehend that a baby could come out living at such a young age, at 18 weeks gestation, but they couldn't do anything. Like legally, they couldn't try to revive the baby. They couldn't do any intravenous type of activities to keep my baby alive. So I was just confused and upset, like, oh my gosh, I'm going through this almost 6-7 months later from the loss of my prior child. And I don't know why. Like, why is God taking me through this journey? And I was extremely devastated and mad at God. And I got into a very deep, dark place because obviously with this loss, I ended up having her vaginally. I ended up getting an epidural and was able to push her out. She died shortly after I pushed her out, and, you know, we spent time with her. They were able to take pictures of her and do all of the same treatment that I received with my son. And I'm thankful and grateful for the hospital to have practices in place to do so. But I still was confused as to why my body failed me. Why did I feel like I am on paper a mother, but really I'm not, because I'm not raising children. You know, even though my body could physically get pregnant, my body couldn't stay pregnant in this case. And in the first case with the loss of my son, I couldn't bring a healthy baby home. So I knew something had to change and something had to be done differently in order to navigate the journey to become a mother in the future. And I had to really do some deep work within myself. After I lost her, I was able to take about 6 or 7 weeks off of work, and that helped me get my mind back right to, you know, we started with a different therapist, and just really to get myself back in the place. And during that time, we were starting to navigate transitioning me to a different role at work. And that actually did happen like shortly before I had lost her. So I moved to a typical day job position and helped fulfill a need within the company. And I'm forever grateful for the company I worked for at the time for allowing me the opportunity to be transparent about my journey. I mean, obviously they saw me pregnant. So they saw the whole 9 months pregnancy, and then saw me not bring home a baby and transition back to work, and then asked that question once I got pregnant again: could I just stay home? You know, could I stay and find another opportunity where I can transition into that? So that was a great opportunity for me to just really clear my mind, focus on another project, and then really focus on how I wanted to try again, and if that was even possible. So I navigated that journey of really transitioning back to work. I was showing at the time, so I really did have to tell people about really what does that look like. And I'll share in another video some additional steps on what I did personally to return to work both times after both my losses, as both of those losses were completely different. You know, one loss, I was 9 months pregnant, so they saw me obviously be pregnant. And the other one, I was barely showing, 18 weeks, I wasn't as far along, but a lot of people around me knew, or I had shared it publicly, that I was expecting again, especially at the same company. So, I went through that journey just really questioning God, questioning, is this body that I have, is it able and capable of producing life? And, will this taint my relationship with my partner? Would this bring down our marriage at the time? We were just, still newlyweds. And how was I going to navigate this new journey as a bereaved mother with no child in her arms? So I continued on that journey for a while, a little bit longer, before I got the courage enough to try again and conceive my son, who I do have here on earth, my rainbow baby. So in part 3 of this series, we'll go deeper into my pregnancy after loss journey and my rainbow baby story. So stay tuned for the next video. This is Sisters in Loss TV. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and we will see you in part 3.